Hey, we've been throwing around the term XML for a little bit of time now. Well, let's find out what all of those angle brackets and slashes are all about right here on IT Pro TV.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
All right, welcome to your Cisco Certified DevNet Associate Show. I'm your host, Ronnie Wong, and today we're actually diving into, XML formats. And here to help us out, of course, is Mr. Justin Denson. Justin, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. XML, we'll get it done. It might not be my most favorite, but it is a necessary evil, so to speak.
All right, so Justin, we have to ask that same kind of question here. What does XML actually stand for?
XML, they picked that X from the second letter of a word. It stands for Extensible Markup Language. And all that means is I have this core set of patterns or definitions that I can do, but then I can make it extensible by going, I'm going to tailor it to my view. So as long as you follow those kind of patterns, you can more or less make up what you want to.
All right, so where do we tend to find the use of XML in the real world?
So XML is very much a legacy system. As of recently, I've been working on a project that used a SOAP, a Simple Object Access Protocol endpoint. XML is the definition that we exchange there. That's how you send information back and forth. Some people say, oh, look how structured it is. And other people like me go, so much stuff to type. I've also seen it in configuration files. Actually, Apache web servers, those configurations are XML. Tomcat, talked about Tomcat before. That's XML. I have seen other web kind of endpoints or applications that use XML for data exchange. There's also times where XML is used in proprietary industries. I used to work in some geospatial information systems, like geoinformation sciences, and there were times where certain tools had an adapted version of XML that allowed you to determine transformations or, for instance, in maps, you have what are called map projections, how we view the Earth on a flat surface. There were ways to say, I want to change from this projection to this projection, but you would do that in XML. You had to manually modify it. And if I'm not mistaken, the thing that's actually doing the switching right now between cameras is using XML behind the scenes for defining how those transitions occur.
Right. So, Justin, when we start talking about this idea, okay, so you've now mentioned it in multiple contexts here. So what kinds of data is actually encoded with XML?
So we've seen JSON. Pretty much anything we can do with JSON, we can encode in XML. It is hierarchical. The one exception is everything's a string. Now, I'm gonna back up just a little bit and put a little notice here. I'm definitely simplifying XML in our discussion, mainly because we don't need to know the ins and outs of every possible feature of XML. We're keeping it simple just so you have the core grasp of it. But anything that's hierarchical, actually I could probably do like separate documents that are related, but then I would have to manage those separately. And well, as long as you're good with having strings, it's all right.
All right, so Justin, let's ask the same question we asked about JSON just a little bit ago in a previous episode. What are some constraints and limitations with XML?
XML, parsing's hard. And parsing's hard just because there are angle brackets and slashes, and then there's, well, do I have the left and the right, or do I just have the embedded, what is called a self-closing tag, and we'll see that soon. Parsing's hard. Sometimes reading's hard. I've actually seen XML documents where I went, what is that? Because you can do things like namespaces, external entities, which are like self-referential in the document. And so there's like one line that actually expands to multiple lines when you parse it. And then when you're programming, when you try to read an XML document, how you go about doing that is not as intuitive. A lot of times, the way you do that with the programmatic tools don't follow the same patterns as other data formats. So you're like, now what is that doing again? And then it almost seems semi-standardized. There is an XML spec, but then people don't adhere to it, but it's still parsable, so you still use it. Structure, as a result, is open to interpretation sometimes, and to some extent, you have that interpretation to make if you're interacting with it. Hey, is this supposed to be a number, or is this a true false value? Hey, what do we do if it's not there? Is it a null? Is it a NaN? There's a lot there. And there are possible security concerns. I talked about external entities. I'm not going to show you that, but do know if I'm receiving XML from an untrusted source, the way that I parse it needs to be very specific, because people can do denial of services, they can do remote code execution. There are security issues that will crop up with XML just because it's meant to be powerful. It's almost like a macro system where I can have XML do things that it wasn't necessarily meant to do, but on the downside, that means other people can get it to do those same things.
All right, so Justin, can you show us an example of an XML document and walk us through it?
Absolutely. I think that's the best way to really get our feet wet, and we're going to keep it simple here. We're going to go with the exact same car, but we're going to represent it as XML. So if we take a look at my screen here, I have XML. Here it is. And notice this document has what I call an open and close tag. So there's an open, there's a close tag. This is called the root element. It means the root because actually XML follows a tree pattern. Here's the beginning, right? A tree grows out of the ground. These are branches and or leaves. If they're terminal, they're kind of like a terminal branch. So for instance, I have make, which is a branch, and that grows out from the root. That means they are bound together. This is a car. Its make branch is Toyota. Notice this value is embedded between an open and a close tag. This slash is necessary for closing. In recent views, because of HTML, which is a version of XML implementation, which is used for web pages, parsers have gotten really good about assuming what you mean. Very strict XML parsers, though, if you forget this slash, they may fail. They'll go, I don't know what to do, and they just kind of shut down. You don't want that. But I also have a model, right? Now, I made this tag up. This doesn't exist in some other specification. Ronnie and I agreed upon it. We sat down, we wrote this together. We agreed upon, oh yeah, car, it's a make, a model, and a year. And I said, well, you know what? I think I'm going to put the year as a value. Value equals, notice the quotes, 2008. This is called an attribute or a property. Now, I'm kind of muddying those. There's actually a subtle difference between attributes and properties, but we're going to keep them the same for now. Equals, and it's a string. And this is a self-closing tag. There's not an open and close. It's just a single tag, but it has a bound value to it. But it is going to be a string. I have to know, if I see a year tag, then the value attribute should be changed to a number if I'm going to interface with it programmatically. Now, if you're just going to read it, who cares? I know what it means to be 2008. But computers only know what you tell them, so if I try to do math with this, it would go, I don't know what you're talking about. Likewise, I have another branch called color, but it kind of forks out into other branches as well. It has a red, a green, and a blue. Notice these are not in quotes. Those would still, more than likely, unless it's a really smart XML parser, would be a string, and it would be up to you to determine, oh, if it's a color, any attribute of a color, right? These are called children, so that can denote some attribute of a parent. There's a lot of metaphors in XML, by the way. There's trees and branches, and then children and parents. I would have to know that this is meant to be a number, and I'll have to make it a number. Likewise, I have tow incapable. Notice the dash there. That's perfectly fine. Open and close. This is a self-closing tag. Wheels has an open and a close tag. And then I have multiple wheel nodes or wheeled leaves or wheel children of this wheels tag. And these are all self-closing. Wheel, and they all have a where, but only 3 of them have a PSI. And if you remember back to the JSON document, and actually let me just show you real quick, JSON, this last wheel had a null, right? Well, if I come to this XML, there's just nothing there. Now, could I have done something like this? Absolutely. But you know what that tells me? Programmatically, sometimes an empty string can be 0. Well, does that mean I have a flat tire, or I just couldn't read the tire pressure? So this would be something that Ronnie and I would have to sit down and go, all right, if I'm leaving the value out, that means I could not measure it. If it's meant to be a 0, then I have to be explicit about it. But what if someone new comes to your team and that's not what they would have thought? Oh, well, it's always 0 if it's not there. Now you have kind of this mismatch. So you have to be very careful here. Now, this is incredibly simple XML. You can do things, like I said, like namespaces, where I have tags like card, : like that's an acceptable tag. I tend to stay away from those because that readability component, if we're trying to like understand this as humans, it seems to me goes out the window, especially if like you're like, what is going on? How's this work? What are you looking at again? So I tend to keep it very simple if I have to use it. And for us, in this cert, in the Cisco world, in the network automation world, you're probably going to see this as a netconf response.
All right, so Justin, let me ask about the indentation again. Is it important here in XML?
Only for readability, just like it is in JSON. You can actually have this all in one line, parsers, no left bracket, right bracket. You'll notice throughout this series, and actually if you were to interact with me tomorrow, I'm a giant stickler for indentation, mainly because it tells me something about the relationship of the data. Yeah, the open and close tag, that tells me that too. But now I know, like visually, I go, oh, wait a minute, color has other things in it. If I'm just quickly reading, I don't know, what's red? What is red doing? But if I bring this up, oh, color is defined by red, green, and blue. Got it. So from a readability standpoint, definitely indent, keep it consistent. From a machine standpoint, they could care less. And if I was transmitting this somewhere, I would actually strip all those out because spaces, extra bytes, and we want to keep that information as small as possible.
All right, so Justin, now that we've gone over the ideas of JSON and understand a little bit more about XML, we still need to talk about YAML. How does this relate to YAML?
YAML. So I try to stay away from XML as much as possible.
Okay.
But we've seen we can represent XML and JSON the exact same information. There are times where we may pick one or the other depending on our tools. But we can agree in both instances, even though there is some readability there, they're not the best or easiest to read. JSON, you have to have double quotes, you have to have non-trailing commas, but you have to have commas everywhere else. XML, you got to have an appropriate close and open or not, depending on what you're doing. Is it missing? YAML is meant to go, all right, so I like hierarchical data. I like, having different attributes like JSON, but I want to do a little more. YAML is an extension of JSON, so we get all those capabilities, but there are some sticking points and there are some things to be aware of. But I think it's best if we let you kind of digest the XML, come on back, look at YAML yet again as a comparison, and see what is actually the difference between these two and what are considerations of whether I pick YAML, XML, or JSON.
All right, Justin, that sounds like a great cliffhanger for another episode. So that means you'll have to join us for that as you come back for that next episode as well. But for us, that's a great place for us to sign off as well. So signing off for IT Pro TV, I'm your host, Ronnie Wong.
And I'm Justin Dennison.
Stay tuned right here for more of your Cisco Certified DevNet Associate Show.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.